Welcome to a Wednesday night. Just like that, we're back. Hey, Vic, what's going on? I see you're here with us too.
Yes, I am here. Faithful Wednesday night. Looking forward to the show. I wore my shirt, my Through the Black shirt, with a serpent on it, and that might play into our topic tonight. Yeah, see how I do that?
For those Blues Clues, folks. Oh. Is that happening on your end or my end? So, folks,
I don't know.
We are at a remote location here, and if you can still hear me, it's very possible that we will cut in and out. I am here with my trusty friend Rob, or should I say the tempter. He's tempted me with Oreo cookies tonight.
Oh.
And anyway, yeah. Vic, this show has been planned out for a few weeks, and I want to get. I'm going to give you a chance to introduce our special guest tonight and the topic. And can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can now. Yep. Can you hear me?
Okay. Well, hey, I'm having some serious internet problems on my end. So I'm going to turn it over to you so you can introduce the guest and the topic tonight.
Okay, sweet. We have got my bestie, my sister in Christ, my comrade in arms, April Lockhart. Drum roll, please. Hey, April. So we are going to be talking tonight, just to hit the ground running, we're going to maybe talk a little bit about fasting. We're going to talk about parasites. We're going to talk about biblical demonology and perhaps the way all three of them coalesce. So I think Tom's frozen. So
yeah, it looks like
April,
he is.
We got the floor. I know.
We're gonna drive this ship. Here we go. Oh, Tom's back. Looks like he is.
Oh no. He's probably just pausing so he can eat those Oreos.
Yeah. No, we saw him blink. He's back.
Okay. All right. We better be good now. Yeah. So I don't know, April. I don't know where to start. I'm just going to say this. We've already done a couple podcasts about this topic. Some of them we've even done together. And I'm not going to belabor the point. I have a testimony where I was recently cured of multiple autoimmune diseases that I was told were going to be incurable. I feel better than I've felt in decades. It's been a couple months and I still am just praising the Lord every day because I cannot believe what he's done. But if you want to hear the whole entire story, you can go to my YouTube channel and there is a 50-some minute video out there called Fasting Cured My Autoimmune. And that was a Hear the Watchman Zoom call. So you can get the whole story there because I don't want to concentrate that much on that. But that's what started it for us. And April, I've been just joking with people who I say, like, it would be so funny if for some reason, like, some law enforcement individual had to confiscate my cell phone and was subjected to reading all of our texts and Marco Polo.
Oh my gosh.
They'd be like, these chicks are so boring. All they're talking about is worms and
I know they would think we were crazy. Like, I don't know who talks that much at all, let alone about, bugs in your body. Like, it's so boring for one. Oh man.
It is and it isn't, because once I got healed, we were like, wait, what? This is all parasites? Because we've been hearing this, there's buzzing out on the internet that like cancer is parasitical and other things are parasitical and dewormers might be able to cure a lot of these things. Right. And we got a lot of sick people in the church who might not necessarily have to be sick. Mm-hmm. So I think we've got good news here, though the healing, it wasn't easy, April. Like, it was a lot of prayer and a lot of waiting, and the actual point of healing for me anyway, the fast, as you know more than anyone.
Yeah. And I think also too, we didn't make the connection right away we were, leaning on all the other things that people say, you're not exercising enough, you're not dieting enough, you're not, like, all the check boxes that you're supposed to do in order to have better health. I don't think we made the parasitic connection until maybe our third iteration, or like we saw the healing, but we didn't know the why. We just thought, well, fasting and give glory to God where it all belongs. But it was the fasting and the healing, and as we were leaning into the Lord and praying every day, and of course being in our word, we began to read the story of the Bible all of a sudden with like different eyes and going, whoa, I think maybe something in the Bible is alluding to what I've just experienced.
Yeah, that was the most exciting part. That's why two women can sit around for 8 weeks and talk about nothing but parasites, because it made the Bible come alive. Yeah. And some of the research we've been doing, which this is exciting to me, April, the longer I talk about this and the more I talk about this with other podcasters and things, the more I'm connecting with people, and you and I are connecting with people who've come to all the same conclusions. And what is exciting to me about this isn't some little pocket of, some downloaded information that came down on tablets just for me and you. The Lord is waking up hundreds, if not thousands, of people in the church at this same time with this same information, because I think he's about to do a great act of healing to prepare the church for the plagues to come.
Absolutely. But with the healing also comes being able to resist other diseases that I think are going to be hoisted upon the whole world. We may have a second iteration of that last bout of stupidity. I won't say it because I don't know if we do that here, but I think your audience knows what I'm talking about. The Bible does give us some clues on what we can do in order to make ourselves not immune to all diseases and sicknesses, but resistant to it. And I think there were kind of a lot of clues by the way this last pandemic demonized certain medications that are known to kill parasites. So that's kind of like the big Blue's Clues that they left for us, right? Because we know that the pandemic was definitely not parasitic. The disease was not, but some in a strange way, but the medication that definitely helped was parasitic. So then what was the connection? And I think you and I have sort of been racking our brains over that. Like, then how does that work then? If the disease itself is not parasitic, why are people getting better then?
Yeah, with anti-parasitic medication.
Right.
Exactly. Well, and I think another element to this, and I'll let Tom or Rob pop in after I say this, but another element to this isn't just our healing, but it's the increase of our faith, because yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil. Once we come upon these discoveries that some of these plagues that are coming upon us aren't these big, huge, elusive boogeymen with no cure, where we are completely dependent upon what we're being told. This is the only cure. When you overcome some of these things, or you get these nuggets of information, the fear goes away. And when these sort of things start to inflict your body, instead of running to the traditional places and getting perhaps bad advice, you can go to the Lord in prayer, and you can go to the Lord in fasting, and through his word and through things that happened in the past, which I hope we can get into tonight, we will see that there's already a formula and a roadmap laid out for us. How did the Hebrews survive thousands of years when they were wandering in the desert, subjected to all sorts of diseases, and they survived? And we understand in our studying that they were able to survive because they sort of had a medical handbook handed down to them from on high, quite literally. And I'm excited to talk about that, but I want to just let Rob and Tom get a word in here edgewise if they're not frozen. Nope, they are. All right, they had their chance, April.
I know. I was going to say, Tom, if you can hear me, blink. Blink twice if you're asking a question. You said survive, but if you read the pages of the Bible, you go back to Genesis and Exodus, they more than survived, but they thrived. Yeah. And I think that's what frightened the powers at the time, which were the pharaohs, right? Yeah. And we know the pharaohs thought themselves to be gods and they wanted to be worshipped as such. But we can see because of what you called it, Vic, these ways of living that were on high, coming down from on high, these people thrived. And it's not by accident that the diet and their lifestyle played a big role in that, because we're seeing this happen all over again. Where's the scripture that says what has been shall be again? Mm-hmm. And truly this is what we're seeing now.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to just kind of start from the beginning before we get into the relevance that it has for us right now today. And I'm not just talking about what happened in 2020. I'm also talking about the rampant autoimmune disease that so many people are suffering from today. So I want to start by going back to, let's retell the story of the Exodus, not through the eyes of theology or through like the Semitic interpretations. Let's pave a picture of the Exodus through the eyes of, say, a doctor or someone who, like, through the lens of parasites, which is kind of our topic tonight. What, if anything, is going on with autoimmune disease? Nothing new under the sun. Is there something very similar to what Christians are facing now as to what was going on in the Exodus? So let's start retelling that story from maybe a different angle, a different facet of the diamond, if you will.
I'll just jump in here. There was paleontologists and all kinds of Egyptologists who have they put information out there, and it's pretty available out on the web. Anybody can look it up. But when they dug up the mummies of the pharaohs, but also of the common Egyptians in ancient Egypt, they found that 65% of the mummies that they discovered were parasitic with all kinds of worms. On top of that, 40% had head lice, 22% were stricken with malaria, and 10% were stricken with leishmaniasis. Now, this is interesting because, well, these people were very, very sick, and this was even before Yahweh strikes them down with the 10 plagues. They were already ripe with sicknesses and bugs and parasites. And on top of it, if anybody wants to do a little bit of research and you look into, well, what were their lifestyle? What were they, let's say, eating? And it turns out that the ancient Egyptian, their staple diet was bread and beer, so carbs and sugar. It's not that they didn't eat other things, like they did eat meat, although it was a rarity. Their main staple diet was bread and sugar. And what we come to know today is that bread, carbs and sugar is the preferred diet of the parasite. So these little creatures inside of our bodies will thrive on a diet like that. And this is what the ancient Egyptians were doing, to include the pharaohs.
Right. And I just want to clarify, April, these parasites that were found on the mummified remains, these aren't the maggots and the things feeding off of the body after it died and decomposed, correct?
No. This was found inside the tissue, and the way that they looked at it, they're sealed in time so they can know. They looked at so much of what the ancient Egyptians were like, and countless conclusions come to these people were overwhelmed with sickness and disease. And there's not really a debate about that. You can find debates about other things, about genetics and things like that. Well, okay, but definitely the parasites were there. You can look into that, and it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Even the pharaohs were.
Yeah. So I want to kind of delve into the very thing that kind of set the Egyptians off. when their eyes sort of turned to the Hebrews with disdain was the Hebrews were out populating them. The Hebrew women were having more babies, and they started to worry they're going to overpopulate us and then take us over. Is there anything parasitical behind the Hebrew women having more babies than the Egyptian women?
Yes, absolutely. You have to look at the Israelite diet. So we all can read in the pages of the Bible that they were in a land called Goshen. They were there. This was like the choice land for their herd because they were herdsmen. The ancient Israelites were cattlemen, and this was their wealth. This is what they brought with them, and they flourished. So if you look at what the diet of what the Hebrews would have been versus what the Egyptians were eating, you have essentially at that time, the Egyptians would have been more like vegetarians or vegans. And then your Israelites would have been like your carnivorous, more eating people. And you're eating lamb and you're eating goat. It's a high source. It's a very good source of protein, good source of fat. It's actually helps to fight against things like anemia. So the Israelites are going to be fighting against parasites as well. It's everywhere. There's no getting away from it. But they are eating a diet that is kind of squelching any parasitic infections. What's interesting on the flip side of that, the Egyptians, like 10%, if you're looking at just what was dug up and found, and if you try to apply that to the reality of what was happening at that time, you have 10% of their population with leishmaniasis. Now, leishmaniasis was often caused by flies. The sand flies would bite you and they would spread that parasite in that way. But one thing about leishmaniasis, that particular parasite, is that it does cause a low sperm count and is attributed to low infertility. And it's interesting because you're like, oh, well, doctors understand this, but the Bible understood it as well, even if it didn't tell you outright. If you go back to the part where it talks about the midwives in Exodus 1:21, go on till 22, it talks about how the midwives, they were blessed in a certain way. Do you remember what that was, Vic?
God established households for them.
Right. And if you look into some translations, it even outright just tells you that they were given families.
Yeah.
And if you think about that, why would Yahweh bless them with a household or a family? Wouldn't they just get their own?
Right. Does it require a miracle to get married and have babies?
Yeah.
It's kind of natural course,
Right.
right?
Why bless me with children and a family? I mean, bless me with $1 million. I just have children on my own, right? But that's not what he chooses to do. Yahweh decides to bless them with children. And if you read in between the lines, I think it's because they can't have any. The Hebrews are outproducing them. And I think it has to do with their diet and their obedience to the Lord as well. But the midwives can't have children. They're trying to have children, but there's probably a huge infertility rate. And there's definitely, if you look at their diet, there's likely to be obesity as well. And we know that actually plays into infertility. And definitely, if you do a little digging and research on ancient Egypt, on top of the infertility, there was high infant mortality.
Mm-hmm.
So you talk about the Pharaoh being afraid that the Hebrews are going to turn on them because of their reproducing the Egyptians. His fears were actually valid. He was not it wasn't an irrational thought. Pharaoh is telling us in the pages of the Bible of a reality that was happening. The Hebrews were outproducing the Egyptians because the Egyptians were probably infertile and couldn't really have children.
Yeah. It's just amazing. And what I love, and we're going to park here for a while, but I just love, after, 4 decades of sitting in churches and hearing the average Christian saying the Old Testament is boring, it no longer applies. When you can read between the lines and see these patterns, it completely applies and becomes almost a roadmap for how to get out of some of the debacles that we're in today. Because the same thing that Egypt was foisting upon the Hebrews, this bondage and this slavery, those metaphors apply today with everything that everyone's talking about with the genetically modified food and the autoimmune diseases and all of this stuff. But going back to the story at hand, and I don't want to skip ahead if you've got more to say. Are we ready to kind of talk about the Exodus, like when they get out to the wilderness, or is there more stuff in Egypt you want to talk about?
There's one more thing, and I kind of just picked this up recently with the midwives. If you remember, okay, so the Lord blesses them with households, which we know it means families, right? Yep. So if you go on to the next verse verse 20, so we're in Exodus 1, go on to 22. And so the Pharaoh becomes really upset. Okay, so the midwives are not doing this. God blesses them. All right, so go on to the next verse, and he issues an edict for the people. Now, I know if you watch the movies and the cartoons, it shows Pharaoh's armies going and throwing all these babies into the water, and you're like, oh, that's so horrible. And I guess that sort of works out in your mind. Of course, the soldiers would do it. I mean, who else would do it? But that's not true. Oh. It was the people, Egyptians. I'm talking about your Egyptian neighbor who saw that you, after God, we've been, okay, let me paint this picture for you. Now, we all just come out of COVID. Remember how horrible that was when you had neighbor turning against neighbor. Yes. You had people turning each other in. You had people ratting each other out. It was awful. And you think, how in the world could Egyptians turn on their fellow citizens? Because the Hebrews were Egyptian. They lived in Egypt. They considered themselves to be, a part of that land. Well, imagine your neighbor comes, snatches your firstborn son, and just throws him into the Nile. I mean, think about what that would take. If you had been trying to have a child, it's like my husband and I have been trying to have a child for 10 years. We couldn't get pregnant. And then when we did, we lost the baby. And here are these dirty Hebrews with all their, herds and, and their diet and their different God, Yahweh, they're Egyptian, but they don't even follow the same gods as here. And they have this land. And by the way, it's thought that the Egyptians during that time did not own land. Right. So the Pharaoh under Joseph acquired all the land in Egypt. He was one of those, he was probably the first one to say to his fellow citizens, you will own nothing and you will love it. Yep. So I think Schwab is not the first to make that claim. I think Pharaoh said it first and Schwab is just biting off of him. So the Egyptians they did not own property. They couldn't have children. Their health was failing them. They look over to their neighbors who are thriving, who are having children, who own land and probably don't even have to pay taxes. You know what? I'm going to walk over there after their 7th child and I'm going to throw that baby in the river. I'm going to claim that baby as a sacrifice to the Nile River god. Do you see how this can kind of play out? Because if you just look at it, it didn't just happen in a vacuum. Like, people don't just murder other people's babies. It doesn't happen that way. There's turmoil that builds up between two people groups, just the same way it did in this country. And we saw that. We saw just a tiny bit of that during the pandemic, right?
Yep.
So I just kind of wanted to point that out because this plays into the story where you get this, this, if for not lack of better words, a dichotomy between two people groups and why they've suddenly become so distinct. They have a different diet. They serve different gods. They just live differently. And you see the difference is how one people group thrive and the other is like dying off and they're jealous of the other and they want to kill the other. So I just wanted to lay that out. That would probably be a good place to switch over into what happens next.
Yeah, and I'll just put a period on that. The juxtaposition of the enslaved people making the quote unquote free people jealous, because it really was the Egyptians that were more in bondage. Right. Even though the Hebrews were kind of under the thumb of the workload. So it's really interesting to see that perspective, because you see, it really wasn't just the Hebrews. And the reason why I think that's important is we tend to think in these categories like Satan or the elite or the government or the Illuminati or whoever these puppet masters are. They hate the Christians. but
Right.
they're going to bless their people. No, they're not going to bless their people either. They're going to be under slavery and bondage also. It's going to be a different kind of slavery and bondage. It's going to look different, so you might not recognize it. But the pharaohs of the world today are not going to care about the people that sign on the dotted line and bow down and worship them. That they will be in a different kind of a bondage, but they will still be in bondage.
Yeah, the pharaohs of today, they'll give you bread and beer. They're happy to give you bread and beer. They're happy to let you sharecrop the land, but you can't own it.
No.
And if you try to, you can come to us for healing, and maybe we'll give you some medicine for that, but we'll treat you. How about that? But you're never going to get healing. And when you look on the other side of the story, Goshen belonged to them. That was actually, I think that's what actually got to the Pharaoh. He was like, those people, I own everything, but that land I can't put my hands on because it belonged to Joseph, and it belongs to those people. And that was like the one little piece of the pie he couldn't get his fingers in, and he really wanted that. And I'll bet when you think of yourself as a god, I'll bet he wanted to get his fingers in that piece of the pie.
Yeah, absolutely. And compound that with the fact that this Pharaoh forgot about Joseph. He was not familiar.
Right.
He was historically now separated enough from that he didn't understand all of the spiritual and heavenly covenants that were made and why that land didn't belong to him. So he was, I think, you can look at all these plagues and you can say, well, this all happened because my people need to be set free so they can go into the wilderness and celebrate their feasts. No, maybe it was you're moving boundary stones, which is part of the Torah, where there's blessings and curses that come along with obeying. And when you're moving boundary stones and you're breaking covenants, there's going to be consequences for that. And that's when Jehovah came in and said, okay, you're moving boundary stones now. Yeah. But let's move on then. Let's follow the Hebrew people out of Egypt into the wilderness. And what can we find perhaps about parasites and anti-parasitic covenants that were going on and unfolding in the wilderness?
Well, we should talk about what Yahweh has his people do, even on the eve of leaving.
Okay.
So before he even gets them out, let's talk about how he strikes Egypt and in the way he does it. So this was interesting, right, Vic? Because it's like you don't read the Bible like this. You just don't see it until you have multiple conversations with your friend about parasites, and everything starts jumping out of the Bible. It's like, oh my God, parasites are everywhere. They're even all over the Bible. It's insane. So I remember one night we were talking about how when you look at 7 of the 10 plagues.
Right.
That God struck Egypt with were parasitic in nature. Either they were parasites themselves or they were vectors to parasites.
Yes.
And we already know these people already had them. So this was just like pushing them all over the edge.
Yes, absolutely. Yep. Yeah, I love that, because we tend, again, through our theological and traditional lenses, each of the 10 plagues were specifically counteracting one of the gods of Egypt. They had the frog god and they had, all this stuff, right? And yeah, that's going on. But what I love about the mind, the unfathomable mind of Jehovah, is he's never just doing one thing. So yes, he is basically squashing every single one of Egypt's gods into the ground. But at the same time, he is sending plagues that are interacting with this parasitical autoimmune phenomenon going on in the country already.
And that each one of these plagues, it's like, well, if they're striking down certain gods, it's like, well, your gods are causing you to be sick. So at least some of them. So he strikes them down in that way. That was, I could not believe, like with the frogs and the lice and the gnats, the flies would have definitely contributed. if you have all of these things happening, there's death all around now. People are getting sick. You imagine the kind of like chaos that ensues in a nation that has a pandemic like this, right? People stop showing up for work. People are sick. They can't come to work. You've got the boils, the local. I mean, it's just crazy. You think like, well, he's got to deliver them out of Egypt. It's like, you'd be running out of Egypt at this point. To me, in my thought, I'm like, this place is not worth staying. Why would you stay here? It's insane, you know?
Yeah. So April, I don't know if you did this research or not, but when you take the 7 of the 10, I know that there were some of the plagues that never even affected the Hebrews at all.
Yeah.
Were those the parasitic ones?
You know what? I don't. Okay, so the blood, the frogs, the lice, and the gnats, they were affected them in the way that they saw them in their land, and I think it was even the flies. But to what it seems to me, they're not being stricken by this stuff. They're just being bothered by it.
Okay.
You know what I
Okay.
mean? So they don't come down with the boils. You don't see that their livestock are dying because of this.
Right.
You don't see the locusts definitely don't hit them, so they're protected from that.
Yes.
But so now we had talked about, okay, so now we're on the eve. He has crushed Egypt. Pharaoh's like, get out of here. You gotta go. They have to eat a meal. If we all remember about Passover, and you're thinking like, okay, you know, that's all typology, right? That all points to something later. And it absolutely does. I wouldn't dream about taking away from any of that, from the spiritual values of what's going on during the Passover. But if you look at it through medical lenses, bitter herb.
Yep. I love it.
Okay, lamb now. Okay, so out of all the ruminants, it's said that lamb is probably the better of all of them. It's going to be any animal is carrying at any time parasite. It's just part of the problem. You can talk to farmers; they have to deworm their livestock all the time. But if you're a ruminant and you have, you're likely to have a far lower parasitic load. Plus, the types of vitamins and nutrients that are found in lamb make a person a little less susceptible because it's high in protein. It's going to help. So Yahweh's prescribing a meal essentially that is going to equip them to not only just to go on this difficult journey, but it is actually anti-parasitic in nature. And like just looking into that was kind of interesting because even the bread, so the bread that they would have been eating, you're thinking, well, bread, right? I mean, wouldn't that be the things that parasites thrive on? But not really, because this is bread that's not tampered with. They're not doing what modern times does to the flour. And the bread that they would have been consuming in the haste of leaving would have acted as a type of binder, and it would have been high in fiber. And so this actually would have equipped them to get rid of a lot of diseases.
And the unleavened bread was void of yeast, and yeast is another parasite treat. They love the yeast, the carbs, the sugar.
Right. They're not. As far as from what I've seen, I don't know that they're adding sugar to it, but they definitely have a lot of what is it called? My mind's gonna go blank on you right now. Of course.
Uh-oh.
It's fiber. Sorry, this bread is high in fiber. So the meal is equipping them to leave, and it's equipping them to clean their bodies out.
Yep.
After all these plagues are hitting you, exactly. I mean, it's so crazy. I never would think of it this way because I've always really. I love Passover. I love it. It's so spiritual, and it all points to Christ, right?
Right.
But it really is, if you're eating it in the form that they did, the first Passover, it is cleansing you. It is detoxing you.
Yeah. You know, I love it, April, how the metaphors that Jesus chooses to refer to himself by. He calls himself the bread of life. You know, that's something that they're poisoning today. He calls himself the living waters. That's something they're poisoning today. And he calls himself the Lamb of God. He's actually kind of, in his metaphorical or allegorical representation of himself, is kind of describing himself as the different aspects of this Passover meal.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it all points, like I said from the beginning, it all points to something much greater. But even in the very now, whether they all understood that or not, but
Right.
even the moment as they're acting out in obedience and partaking of this meal. Now, anytime you would have had, you know, a lamb, you would salt it. But so that right there is already anti-parasitic nature. But you were commanded, you had to eat it all in that night. So you couldn't let it stay over and rot. You know what I mean? So if there's not going to be the problem of undercooking and because meat, you know, if it's stayed overnight, you're going to have, you know, all kinds of things crawling in it and everything. But you were commanded, you had to eat it in that night.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I love that. Okay. So this is good stuff. As we are now traveling, and I want you to not leave out this detail, as we meander now into the wilderness, I want you to explain your research on what was going on in the sky when they were reveling there in the wilderness. You don't have to start there, but I just want to make sure that you include that detail.
All right. Yeah. So they're coming out of the wilderness. Okay. Yeah. You have to calculate, if you calculate from the time where they eat the Passover meal, if you count the days, all the way to the point where Moses now at the mountain, he goes up to get the commandments, right?
Yep.
This is them standing at the base of the mountain saying, yes, we will. They're saying yes to the covenant, right? And so they say, it's crazy. We can't hear this. Moses, you go get the commandments for us. We're going to die, because his voice was so frightening. So Moses is like, okay, he goes up to the mountain. If you calculate the days until he comes down and he sees what they're doing, right about the time Israel does the sin of the golden calf, you find yourself at in or around a full moon. Now, what do we know about parasites and the full moon?
More active. The lunatic spirit comes out.
Right. So this is not just, hocus pocus. There are actually medical reasons for why parasites are more active around the time of the full moon. It all is surrounded about a chemical signaler in our bodies that produces called serotonin. Apparently, parasites love that. They thrive on it, and so they all come out to play. And they're breeding and having orgies in your body and doing all the foul, nasty things that they're doing. They're moving around in your body. And if you don't understand what parasites have been accused of doing in the human body, some of the things that have been recently discovered about what parasites do is they bring fear, anxiety, heightened sexual drive, violence. I mean, all kinds of crazy things. They can give you gluttony, suicidal thoughts. And if you remember, how many times did they complain about how they were hungry?
I know. And they were specifically hungry for the delicacies of Egypt.
Right.
And, you know, April, I don't know if we've even ever talked about this before, but I was reading through Deuteronomy this week, and I don't know if we picked up on this yet, but the point where they say, we don't like this food, where's our good food? There's a minor detail in the verse before it. It says they had gone 2 weeks without bread or water. They had been put on a forced dry fast for 2 weeks, which is a detox. It's a parasite cleanse.
Absolutely.
And so at this point, they should have been clean of parasites. So this, to me, April, and I'm just fleshing this out.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about, you know, Moses and the golden calf and all that stuff, but this is after the fact. And now they have covenanted. Now, at this point, Moses comes down a second time with the Torah, and all the people gather and they agree to walk in covenant. So what happens then later when they start grumbling for the food is the whole camp has gone through a forced 2-week parasite cleanse, a dry fast, no food or no water. At that point, people should have been healthy, clean of parasites, energized, like, because when you fast that long and you're getting clean, you actually get energized after day 4. So if you have people in the camp after a 2-week parasite cleanse who are moaning and groaning, wanting their beer and their bread back, these are people where the parasite cleanse did not work for them, and those parasites are still craving. And so it's interesting to me that at that point, the camp sort of gets purged of the people who came to the fore as not really being covenant people. And it always looks to us like Jehovah in the Old Testament is just arbitrarily killing masses of people here and there because they're complaining about food or whatnot. But we have to keep in mind this whole thing, the entire scripture, especially the stuff in the Old Testament, this people has to be preserved, because according to the promise of Genesis 3:15 that the Messiah is going to come through this bloodline, they can't die. They have to be preserved. And when you look at all of the diseases and all of the nations that we read about in the Bible that are no more, that eventually did die off, you look at some of this stuff and you just think that it's arbitrary, but what he was doing is preserving this bloodline. And he couldn't have a bunch of people in the middle of the camp that were going to start reintroducing the carbs and the sugar. They now had a new diet. Moses came down that second time. They covenanted with God, and part of that was a restricted, diet. We talk now with autoimmune about all these elimination diets and all these fun things we can't eat anymore, but there really is an elimination diet.
It does seem like, it seems like when you read that, they are having an whether they like it or not, like there's an elimination diet. And you can see how this would be if you've ever done a long fast and you're experiencing the die-offs. When you start to read what the Israelites, the crazy things they say and do while you're there in the wilderness, you're like, oh yeah, I think I've said that too. I think I know exactly what that feels like. But I think that the part that blows my mind is you watch people act crazy right around the time of the moon. They just came out from Egypt, and we know that it wasn't just the Israelites that came out. It was many Egyptians came out as well. So they would have brought their worms with them, right? Yep. Now, if you read some extra biblical things, it suggests that the rebel rousers were primarily the Egyptians and the sojourners that were among Israel. Now, I wouldn't say, well, that relieves Israel from blame, because here's the thing. Israel, what they ought to have done, the natural borns should have said to the Egyptians that came out, no, we don't do that. We don't have other gods. Look, Yahweh is not like the other gods in Egypt. So we're not allowed to do that. So just shut that down. Let's just wait patiently for Moses. But that's not what they did. They went along with it. And so everybody got in trouble.
Aaron, even.
Yeah.
Of all people.
Of all people, right? He should have been the one to shut it down.
Yeah.
So I want you to describe about what happens with the sin of the golden calf, because this is mind blowing.
This was so incredible. So one of the things that one of the journeys I've been on recently in my quiet times and my devotions and things is the Lord has been revealing to me places in scripture where I traditionally, through listening to sermons my whole life, have always understood a certain passage to be God being mad.
Right.
And he's flipping them on their head and showing that some of these passages, due to our complete disjointedness with the culture and the context and the history and the language and the geography of the original text, it's actually great compassion, mercy, and long suffering that we're seeing. It's not him being angry. So most of us were raised to be taught that Moses comes down from the mountain. We know he's angry because he smashes those tablets.
Right.
We're told he's angry.
Right.
We're told that Jehovah's angry because he's ready to wipe them out and start over, right? So
Correct.
right after that, we have this golden calf incident where it's ground into powder. Of course, it seamlessly goes from talking about, Jehovah and Moses being angry to this making them drink it. So you assume this is your punishment because we're both mad.
Right.
And it's kind of like the equivalent of when our dog craps on the carpet, and you know how you train it is you rub the nose into it to like teach it a lesson.
Right.
Every time you poop on this carpet, you're going to have to smell it, and then that's going to remind you to not do it again. So I always kind of thought this golden calf incident was Moses acting out of anger.
Right. Righteous anger, though, right?
Righteous anger, rubbing their noses in this dung that they've produced, right? Well, if you grind gold down to powder, which is actually really mysterious in and of itself, because if you burn gold, it goes molten, right? Now you can turn gold into powder, but it requires a level of heat that most of us can't just generate in our microwave, right? Like it requires something esoteric or supernatural there. Maybe God even had a role in that. We don't know.
Yeah.
But when this calf was ground down into powder and then he threw it in the water and had them all drink it, gold dust, nanoparticles of gold, and colloidal gold, it's an anti-parasitic, like colloidal gold. Like people are buying colloidal gold now, and everyone's heard of colloidal silver that it's done things, but the colloidal gold is actually anti-parasitic. People have been taking it for MS and for autoimmune, for eczema, for psoriasis,
rheumatoid arthritis, even.
Yep. Yes. And so what we have here isn't a punishment. They have just been reveling. These parasites have been activated because they opened a door when they were worshiping demons. And we know the parasites were activated because it was tripping all of this serotonin. And we know that they were drinking and doing their orgy stuff and all that, right? So what was happening there is Moses was providing a remedy for the parasites because this nation had to be preserved because the Messiah is coming through this people. They have to be kept alive. And so we can talk about some of the other times in scripture God's done that, like raising the serpent on the pole. There are multiple portions of scripture where when a plague hit or parasites were activated or serpents bit them, God offered the entire camp an opportunity to be healed. But they had a part in it too. You have to drink the colloidal gold. You have to look at the serpent upon a pole. And some people we know from the serpent on the pole, some people didn't do it. Some people were so hard-hearted. They're like, I'm not doing that. And then they died. And so I told you about this, April, and I think it's really cool. And it's not my research. I think it's something that the health ranger recently put out. And he offered a third time in history, or in the biblical narrative, I should say, where the camp that's been overridden by parasites is potentially being given their golden calf, their colloidal gold, their serpent on a pole. And what is that Mike Adams? Is that the health ranger's name?
Yeah.
I always get his name wrong. So what Mike was saying was, we always attribute everything in Revelation as judgment and horror and pain and discipline, right? Everything that's going on is the anger of God and all these bowls of wrath and 4 horsemen and all this. And so when we read about the star wormwood crashing to the earth and making all the waters bitter, we assume he's angry again. He's mad at us. This is the devil. Wormwood is like Leviathan. He's a bad guy. He's polluting our water supply.
Right.
But again, wormwood is a bitter herb. And it's so bitter that most people, when they're doing a parasite cleanse and they have to drink wormwood because it's gross, they dilute it in water. And when they drink it, it's anti-parasitic. And so could it be, perhaps, according to Mike's research, could it be, once again, we're seeing anger and wrath and judgment out of a loving, compassionate, slow to anger God?
Right.
And is it possible that at that time, when all hell is broken loose on earth and the parasites are running rampant, could it be that what restores some people to sanity is that they drink that water, if they're willing to drink it?
Right. And that's the thing, because I wish I could have it in front of me right now. I don't even have my Bible here, but it says, if my memory serves me, that many could not drink it because it was so bitter.
Yes.
But what if they had said, I'm going to drink it anyways, although it's bitter? People just refuse to drink it. It seems to me as though they're saying, I'm not going to drink it because it's bitter.
Yeah, it's
like, I'm not going to fast because it's difficult.
Yep.
Not because I can't, not because it won't heal, because it will heal you. We know wormwood will. We know that bitter water would drive parasites out. Yeah, it's very interesting. It does seem to be like the second iteration of the golden calf cure.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
And I'm not dogmatic about it. I'm just, it's right. Interesting to think about it from a different perspective than what we've always been taught.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, when you think of it in terms of, okay, there's nothing new under the sun. History keeps repeating itself. Like, let's lay this on the template of Ecclesiastes. Nothing new under the sun. Everything that's been thought of, everything. Now, if you take that literally, are you telling me that my super duper smartphone is not, there's nothing new under the sun? What is that? And of course, nobody had these things before. What does that mean? But even if it's not like a literal thing,
right?
When you look at the Exodus, when you look at the technology of Egypt, when you look at the esoteric knowledge they had, when you consider the kind of knowledge that, say, Daniel, Joseph, and Moses in particular would have had, because they had the education of Egypt and Babylon.
Sure.
I mean, these were the guys who knew black magic. They had the Book of the Dead. They had the Emerald Tablets of Thoth. I did the math on that once. Moses would have been familiar with the Book of the Dead and things like that. And so you look at some of this stuff in Genesis and Exodus, and these things that Moses was doing, things that just, we don't think about it deeply enough. But even when you think about the Ark of the Covenant and the high priests having to wear certain fabric when they were around it, and it giving off electrical frequencies where people would die if they touched it. We just think, well, you're going to die if you touch it because God's going to be mad at you. Again, it always goes back to God's mad at everybody. But it could be that thing was producing a frequency, not even to mention the fact that the glory of God was housed in it. But the fact is, we tend to think there's nothing weird going on in these passages. How in the world did Moses turn a golden calf into powder?
Right. Where do you get the water?
Yeah. Right. They're in the middle of the desert, right?
Enough for, like, what would it's estimated like 5 million people to drink.
Yeah.
Exactly. That has to be that. There's no way to do that unless you invoke supernatural.
Yeah.
Like, they're not just going to ground it up, and you ground that up so fine, a golden calf, if you imagine what the size of what it would be, if you grounded it down to a powder, you really would have enough parts per million to make colloidal gold for an entire nation.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, Vic, but what was shocking to me, because I am not familiar with colloidal gold. I Googled it for the first time because I thought, I just got to know more about this, because it seems like there's something really there. If God is giving his people the antidote to the sicknesses that they brought with them out of Egypt, the plagues that they brought with them, generational things that they brought with them. Because by the way, parasites are generational. They get passed down to the mother. It's likely whatever parasite you may have, your family may have had it for 1,000 years. I'm not even kidding about that. But so the diseases they brought out of them, this supposed colloidal silver, this golden calf, is the antidote for their problem. It's a treatment.
Yes.
I don't know that it rids them all of their worms, but it definitely is a treatment. It kind of gets them to calm down.
Yes.
And isn't it so poetic and righteous the way he does it? Like, he could have manifested it out of air. He could have just made the golden calf disappear and then, like, here's this colloidal silver, but he didn't do it that way. He's just so poetic in the way that he does it.
Absolutely. And just to add, I hope this isn't too far off track, but if you want to talk about some of the, for lack of a better word, esoteric things going on in the wilderness, if you read in the original languages, it's the original Torah tablets were carved by Jehovah out of the floor of heaven, basically. And in the proper translations, some say sapphire, but it has been historically shown that ancient people didn't really know the difference between sapphire and lapis lazuli. So a lot of passages in historical documents that talk about sapphire, it really was lapis lazuli. And you can find hints to that in Enoch 18, where the mountain of God in the center of this Eden-like place, it's almost like a volcano, and the fire that's coming out of that central mountain that rises to heaven like a throne of God, it covers all the 6 mountains that surround it, and it's made of lapis lazuli. So if you think in terms of, if these original Torah tablets that were smashed were made of lapis lazuli, even here, there's mercy. Moses smashed these things. He had every right to do so because he was righteously angry. He went up, and the second time they weren't made of those stones. It was just hewn out of regular stone, right? Even this is mercy, because when he came down the second time and read the covenant to the people and they all agreed, this is the first time the people understand that they're to wear the tzitzits, the fringes on their garments, and that a blue cord runs through it. And the blue cord is to remind them of the covenant. And the reason that's a trigger is because the original tablets were blue.
Interesting.
But here's what's amazing. If the original Torah tablets were from the floor of heaven, let's say, the way that they made blue dye in the old days was they ground down lapis lazuli into powder and they made blue dye out of it. So let's just say, because we're talking about the golden calf perhaps being a healing element. How else were they healed? How else did they survive for 40 years and their sandals didn't wear out and they were healthy and Caleb fought like a 40-year-old when he was 80? Let's say, again, total just theorizing here, if they used the broken tablets to create blue dye, to make a blue fringe for the cords of all of the tzitzits that were worn. If you transfer that, like, again, totally theorizing here, April, but in the New Testament, when it says that there's healing in his wings, and we have the woman who grabbed onto the fringes of his cloak and she was healed.
Yeah.
Is this maybe an Easter egg that there was a healing component to those fringes?
Because there was a healing component to those supernatural ordinances handed down to man by God.
Yeah.
And they are. And if, I think that was one of the things that has been really cool about researching this stuff, is that what you see, especially in some of the stuff that seems kind of like far removed from us, and we can't do them, and we shouldn't, some of them, it would be unbiblical to try to do so. But when they were given at the time, especially a lot of these cleanliness laws and food laws, and they really do serve as medical hedges of protection from becoming parasitically infected, like the way they were in Egypt.
Yeah.
Because God is allowing his people to like have a supernatural protection. And it does, these are like they're guards. They're guards around them.
Yep.
That's incredible.
Can we kind of put a magnifying glass over one of those right now? Because I thought this was a really cool part of your research. The funeral traditions, the ancient Semitic tradition where they would all go into the house with the dead body for, was it 7 days or was it 4?
Yeah. I can't even remember. I've got to get my notes out.
Okay.
Well, I mean, there's so many of them, but it goes into like the cleanliness, the clean and unclean, right? Yeah. It really all boils down to this, is that when you come in contact with the dead, when life touches death, right? God is saying, no, if you touch a dead thing, even if it is a loved one that you buried, you need to quarantine yourself away from the rest of the population, because when you touch dead things, there's all kinds of like sicknesses and illnesses that can come upon you based on that, right? One of the things is they're not supposed to like, I think you're supposed to bury the body. You have to buried it by like the 3rd day or the 4th day, if I'm not mistaken.
The 2 parts that I thought were so fascinating is we see all over scripture that mourning, and it not just for the dead, but it could be mourning for sin or, grief, lamentation, is the ashes and the shaving of the head. And I've always just thought my whole life, like, that's just their tradition. It's their culture.
Right.
But there are several types of mites, mites. There's mites that are not parasites, but
they're technically like exo parasite. Yeah. They're not the bugs that live inside.
Yes. But, like these demodox mites that kind of like to live in our eyebrows and in our hair follicles. And there's 2 different kinds of demodox mites. One likes the follicles and one likes the oil in the follicles. Mm-hmm. And they're not parasites. They're actually part of the arachnid family. There are these microscopic mites, but for example, when they're on certain animals, they're mites, like ticks and chiggers and things like that. But once they get onto humans, if they're embedded in hair follicles, they become parasitic to humans. And so when you have people grieving the dead, in other words, they're in the presence of a decomposing body, you've got people shaving their head. So this is anti-parasitic. Let's keep these mites out of our hair follicles. But then you've got this throwing ashes on their head when people are grieving.
Right. Yeah. Which is, they use that to make soap.
That's where I was going with that. And so I always envision, and it's the way it's portrayed. And again, I wonder if we're culturally too separated from what was going on. I always kind of thought that like there was always just this convenient little tin bucket and it was full of ash and they would just like throw all this soot in their face, right? But what if what they were actually doing is they, putting ash on the head. Right. We're taking that super literally. But when we wash our hair,
like an ash bath.
Yeah.
Maybe, like an ash cleanse, yeah.
Maybe they were just washing their hair
with
an anti-parasitic. They were washing their hair with stuff.
Body.
I mean, even animal shampoos now, people that have horses and things like that, they have a very special shampoo that kills all these ticks and things like that for protection. So I wonder if that ash was some sort of like a antiquated shampooing sort of process.
Yeah. Well, definitely we know the hyssop was when they were commanded to do the ash of the red heifer. They were to burn the red heifer, mix it with water and hyssop. Like hyssop is a well-known antiseptic. But back to the when you're mourning was interesting about even the way they mourn. Like God gave them rules about even how to mourn. If you mourn in this way, like 30 days you were to take. Joseph mourned for his father 7 days, and then Aaron mourned for 30. I think Moses mourned for 30. This is enough time that where you're quarantined away because you've just sat and hugged and cried and wept over a dead body. Now, when a body dies, they're not taking the bodies to the morgue. They're not, what do you call when they
Embalming.
They're not being embalmed. So these all of the, you know, parasites that are in the body of your dead beloved eventually is going to come out because, you know, they're looking for another host.
Yeah.
Now, even though we may not have understood this, Yahweh did, and he knew that, hey, you know, you're gonna mourn, but you're gonna be, when you're done mourning and after they've been buried, you're gonna be quarantined away from everybody. Now, the way they mourned back then, it wasn't like the way we kind of do it now, where there wasn't rejoicing and gathering with the you know, it wasn't all this, you know, eating and drinking. It was like you mourned, you know, you had ashes on your head, possibly you shaved, possibly, I don't know, but you were off by yourself in sadness. And in fact, you were allowed 30 days. You were given 30 days. You were expected to weep and cry for 30 days.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. So I do want to move a little bit into the New Testament, but before I go there, because you and I have been compiling and working on an anti-parasitic law list of several of the things in the Old Testament that are actually anti-parasitical. Are there any of them, just one or two of them offhand, that you want to share, just to kind of show that this isn't just a one-off? There was actually many of them.
Oh my gosh. Like, I think I've come up with like 45 of them, but I don't want to get into great detail, but the washing of the hands and the feet of the priests, you know, before they go into the tabernacle, they're going to be serving an entire nation and, you know, spreading diseases. As we know, in this modern time, the best way, as we just all came out of this pandemic, right? What was your best way of protecting? Was to wash your hands. They kept telling you, wash your hands, keep your hands clean. And if you think about what the job of the Levites are, they're going to be serving the nation. They're going to be touching blood. They're going to be sprinkling blood. They're being told,
Dead animals.
yeah. I mean, they're coming out of a possibly dirty place, and they're coming into a holy place. Wash your hands, but also wash your feet. I never saw that before. So you're not even going to tread the outside world inside this holy ground. You're going to wash your feet and your hands. And that they were washing their hands and feet out of a copper laver, which is also anti-parasitic. It's antifungal and antibacterial.
Yes.
Incredible.
Yep. And the feet, April, I know that at various times when I would be doing research online to try to like get rid of various things, and so they would have some sort of an oil or some sort of supplement that they said would help. And they would say to get the liquid form and to wash, like put it on the bottom of your feet, because apparently, I can't back this up, but apparently when you put things on the bottom of your feet, there's an absorption rate that's beneficial to that. So if you're keeping your feet clean, because if good things are being absorbed through the feet, then bad things probably are as well.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. There's so many of them. Oh my gosh.
I know.
I think that like the big ones, you know, when you're going up to the temple, I don't care if you're male, female, Jew, Gentile, anybody going up to the temple has to bathe. You are going to submerge your body into the waters and you're going to go up there. The Levites, they definitely bathe. So by the very nature of what the commandments were given, the people are clean when they come up here. And this isn't about, you know, God is not just concerned with our spirit. He's concerned about these, you know, these flesh suits that we have to wear while we're here on the earth, these temporary tabernacles, if you will, because so much of what happens here and here, it's informed by what we're actually feeling in the real world. You know, you're depressed there's depression that comes over you when your body is sick. It's many, many forms, you know. Yes. I don't know, rheumatoid arthritis, fevers, anemia, bloating, abdominal pains, impaired growth, blind, deafness, illness, all kinds of illnesses, inflammation of every kind. All of those things we know are, if not directly influenced by, or if they're not directly, they're indirectly caused by parasites. I mean, medicine finally is admitting to these things, but if these things are causing all of this sickness and death, and we know nine before I just start throwing numbers out here, I'm going to make sure I get it right. 9, I think it's billion, or is it million? I don't want to be like Joe Biden. 9, okay, where is it? 9 million. Okay, there it is. 9 million people the WHO put out died from parasites. 9 million people directly from parasites. And then 3.5 billion people around the world are affected with sicknesses that are caused by parasites. Now, that's just them being honest. Those numbers are probably far higher when you factor in, some of these diagnoses of people who have been told they had cancer and tumors and things like that, when really they weren't cancer and tumors. They were parasitic infections.
Yes.
You know.
And I just want to throw something in here too. My dad, who many Through the Black listeners are familiar with, Dad worked for Abbott Laboratories for almost 30 years. And what he told me, because I recently got blood work done, because before I got healed, I was going to do a parasite cleanse. And I got blood work done specifically to answer that question. And I was told by a blood test that I did not have parasites and I didn't have to worry about it. Found out later that wasn't true, because they came out. But what my dad was explaining to me, and this is just a layman trying to repeat what someone who knew what they were talking about was saying. My dad said that the tests that they are using now to determine parasitic load, they're decades old. Yeah. And they are not able, and they're also targeted at the wrong area of the body, because a lot of people with these parasites that are doing a lot of damage, they're way up in the colon, and that's not where this blood is being drawn. And so there's also now a whole new classification of microparasites that these tests do not pick up on. And so I just want to encourage people that if you've ruled this out because your doctor in nothing nefarious or intentional, just based upon what they have at their disposal as their tools, all they're doing is reading tests. And so I just want you to know that if a lot of this is kind of sinking in, like, this really sounds like what I've got going, but my doctor swore I didn't have parasites. The blood work says I don't have parasites. I'm telling you to continue pressing in prayer and asking the Lord if this is the issue, and to just wisely do. No one's parasite cleanse is going to look exactly the same. In fact, April, you found an amazing book that we both listened to on Audible called The Fasting Cure, written by Upton Sinclair in 1911. And what I thought was so amazing about this book is he's giving case after case after case after case. And nobody did the same fast. Some people were doing a raw milk fast, and some people were doing a beef, like bone broth fast, and some were doing a water fast, some were doing a dry fast. Some people did it for 3 days. Some people went 23 days. Like there wasn't this little formula. And that's my testimony too. The fast that I went on was so bizarre, and there were so many weird twists and turns. I never would have come up with that on my own. And so I even hesitate to tell people what I did, because you could go out and do the same exact thing and not get results. And so
because everybody, it's like, there's no one size fits all medicine. It's the truth with everybody's health. So even just you and I, if we were to compare our own health journey and what parasites or diseases that we're fighting against, it's not going to be the same. If we both did 10 days of water fasting, let's say, even though we're both going to experience an amount of healing, we're not going to experience the same, because, maybe one of us was more highly parasitic than the other. One of us had an autoimmune disease. Age is different. You've got to think about a lot of things. And I think it would even matter even between, they say gender, there's a difference even with that. And every time you do one as an individual, there is no two fast alike. So if you're trying to use your last one to compare to this one, you're going to find that, whoa, the results were way different.
Yes. So absolutely. And as we discovered, I was not healed the very first time I did a fast. We were 3 or 4 fasts into it by that point. And there's still some things that we're both working on that haven't fully, developed. And so it's not this like, hey, I fasted and now I'm cured and I've got the body of a 20-year-old again, So some of them, it requires multiple. It's not just a overnight cure in every case. But so April, I hope we have time. Well, I want to get into the New Testament, especially that passage where Jesus says, some only come out by prayer and fasting. And now we're not talking about parasites. We're not talking about autoimmune. We're talking about actual demons. And we've been talking about, here's the thing about some only come out by prayer and fasting. And he's talking about demons. Here's the thing. The name of Jesus is the name of Jesus. And if we use the name of Jesus to cast out devils, and these are just demons, these are just low-level demons, I don't care if there's a hierarchy. There shouldn't be some demons that are afraid of the name of Jesus and some aren't. And you've got to there's no such thing as a demon that doesn't flee at the name of Jesus Christ. And so what is going on when he says some, meaning demons, only come out by prayer and fasting? And I'm going to throw it over to you. I've got some stuff to say too. The one thing though I do want to point out is this is another passage that we've traditionally hear about. We've heard the sermons. Again, because of the context and the flow of the story, it appears, because the man says, your disciples tried to cast it out and they couldn't do it. And then immediately Jesus is saying, oh, wicked and perverse generation, how much longer must I put up with you? Some only come out by prayer and fasting.
Right.
It really seems like he's chastising his dopey disciples who don't have enough, chutzpah to do this.
Right.
But as we all know, we already know the disciples were not fasting, because the religious leaders came to Jesus and said, we have to fast. John's disciples are fasting. How come your disciples aren't fasting? And he says, because the bridegroom is among them. When I go away, they'll fast again. So Jesus is not going to give this bipolar sort of response where, hey, disciples who I told didn't have to fast while I was here.
Why aren't you fasting? Yeah.
If you've been fasting, you could have done this. And so he's not talking, I don't think, about the disciples. I think he's talking to the Father and the Son even. And the Son. Well, that's where I was going. I think there's one of two things going on here. The Son, I think if the Son had fasted, he might have perhaps purged these things. But if the Father, as the authority figure, had prayed on his behalf, because that's something that you and I have been experimenting with, is intercessory fasting, where we're praying on behalf of other people who are sick and finding success there. Yes. Yep. So I'll throw it to you, but I'm kind of thinking now about the research we were doing about maybe the demons being, the parasites being a host of the demons. And so it's not that, like, I'm starting to see a trend online where I'm starting to see that phrase, parasites are demons, and you're seeing the pictures of the parasites under microscopes.
Right. And they look really and they're terrifying. They look like.
Well, I'm pretty sure if you put a ladybug or a butterfly under a microscope, they'd scare the crap out of you. It's a microscope after all, right? So I need a little bit more evidence than these things look creepy when they're magnified 10,000 times. But I'm tending to think that if demons are entering parasites, so the parasite is the host.
Right.
And then we're ingesting poisoned food or water or whatever it is, undercooked meat, that this is a clever way that these demons have found entrance into the body of people who aren't doing the witchcraft and the rituals and playing with Ouija boards. And, this is a great way to get into Christians. And I'm not talking demon possession like Linda Blair and spitting up pea soup and all that. I'm talking about oppression, Why are so many Christians who love the Lord with all their heart suffering with chronic fatigue and chronic anxiety, like clinical depression,
Obesity.
and obesity, autoimmune? And so if you cast a demon out through prayer, in the name of Jesus, get out, and the demon leaves, the host is potentially still in there.
Still there to cause the havoc. And, and I'm with you on that, because I've been very uncomfortable to say that parasites are demons. I mean, because that just sounds, that just sounds kooky to me. It really, really does, because I can look at a parasite underneath a scope and I can see what it is. You can catalog them all. There's all different. So science shows us that these things are real. We know they're real. But the thing that always got me was that if you take a demon and a parasite, they have the same mission. I don't mean that they have, like, parasites sit there and think about, oh, my whole point in life is to destroy this host's body. I don't know that they sit around and have conscious thought like that, but they definitely do the same destructive. They destruct the human body in the same way. Yeah. Gosh, so much research. There was a book that I just read. It's called "This Is Your Brain on Parasites." It is mind blowing, Vicki, because, man, this is a very recent book that just came out. We still are not sure to what end do parasites control or influence a person. At what point are you actually making your own choices now? At what point is your sexual drive, your hunger, your bad attitude? I mean, they're talking about some of these parasites, especially T. gondii is the nasty one, right? Yep. They're associating, and I don't say cause, but they're associating. It's a pretty strong association too. That T. gondii has been responsible possibly for many suicides, for many violent acts, for many sexual deviances that a person maybe normally under normal circumstances would not engage in, but because they're so they have such a parasitic load of T. gondii that they're getting thoughts that are really not even theirs. It's like, and I think everybody can relate to this. You ever been up late at night? And you're tired, but you just can't sleep. Well, it's funny because these parasites are nocturnal. And then all of a sudden you're hungry and you're like, what? I just ate like 3 hours ago. How could I possibly be hungry? And there you are. You just downed a whole tub of ice cream. Like, and then afterwards you're like feeling super guilty because you're like, it didn't even taste good to you because really you weren't really hungry and it didn't even satisfy your crave. You had like a sweet tooth because the parasites used you because they were hungry and they kept you up. So why not starve those little buggers out? Because Jesus said we could, or at least he alludes that we could. I'll be fair and say that, right? But, I think, am I ready to say that parasites are demons? No, I'm not. What I would say is that parasites could be a host to indwell a demon, and then you ingest it, and then you go off and do something is not right, and you activate that thing.
Yeah.
So you can cast it out. The demon does have to go. There's authority in the name. But that little bug is still in there. And I think that's what Jesus is telling us. The prayer is to make the spirit leave. Yes. And the fasting is to make the physical, biological thing expel out of the body. Because here's the thing. Yep. We are body and spirit. We are in the here and now. But we also have an essence in us that lives for eternity, right? We have to address both. I think Jesus is giving us the formula to address both. He's saying, look, in my name, they have to flee. They have to go. But hey, now here's where you get to do your part. This is the part where you get to pick up your cross and be a participant in the faith. Now you get to fast and cast that little bugger out. You get to starve that little guy out. And I think sometimes we miss that because we're so sucked into the spiritual reality of things. And I'm not I'm not bringing that down. That the spiritual realm is real.
Right.
But there are bugs that are hurting us. And you can see all throughout the Old Testament, as you and I've just laid out, God had been dealing with that. It's not like he just dealt with their spiritual brokenness, because he was, their wicked, sinful hearts, because he was, but he was also addressing their physical ailments that was driving them to lunacies, to madnesses.
Yeah.
Vic, how in the world do you watch Egypt be destroyed by the strong arm of God? Then he splits the ocean and you walk through on dry land, and then you say these crazy things like, why did you bring us out to the desert? You should have just allowed us to die. Couldn't you have just killed us in Egypt? That's crazy, Vic. That's not, I'm sorry, but you got bugs. The bugs are definitely driving you to say these things. You're not right. So I think Jesus is addressing a physical reality that we're all bound to because we live in these physical bodies. Probably this physical reality of the worms and bugs were introduced to our realm probably at the garden when Adam and Eve ate something that they know they were not supposed to eat.
Yeah.
And sickness and death and plagues and illness and thistles and thorns, they've been with us ever since, and they're probably going to be with us in these bodies until we get our new perfect ones.
Yeah. Absolutely.
The incorruptible bodies, right? That don't get, that the worm can't, the worm that doesn't die can't ever get it.
I was just going to go there, that, we're getting these resurrection bodies, and the people who accepted their eternal life bodies here on earth, whether that's through technology or transhumanism or whatever, their worm never dies, meaning we're going to get healed. This is the irony to me, April, because I deal in the circles with all of the people with the ascension doctrine who are, we're going to ascend to this higher vibrational self. And it's like, you never will, because your parasites are never going to be gotten rid of in this body. Only the resurrection bodies.
You can manage them and you can keep them at bay, but I don't know that there is fully ridding the body of them. And even if there was, if you could make the case, well, I found the protocol on which to expel all of them. The very next minute after you've expelled them, you've got them right back, because think about when you're just like, today, I must have killed 1,000 flies today. I am not even kidding. These little buggers were landing on everything. It's just like they're all getting ready to die off, right? Because fall's coming. Yeah. So it's their last hurrah. But if a fly landed on your sandwich just before you ate it, that's like 200 parasites that are now on your food that you don't even see. You just ingested that. If you don't have perfect water coming out of your faucets, and a lot of us don't, you washed your face and brushed your teeth with parasites and you don't even know it. Yeah. There's so many ways that they can be introduced into the body, which is why we should try to eat a healthier diet in order to make our bodies inhospitable to them, right? Yes. So we can keep them at bay. So I don't know that this is the war. It's fought. It's forever. Well, in this life, it's fought, but it's never won until the victory is Christ, right? And we all are in our resurrection bodies. But yeah.
Well, I'm glad you brought up that there are things that we can do to make our biome uncomfortable for these things, inhospitable to these things. And so, we think like, okay, I have to have a better diet and I have to stop drinking pop and go into Taco Bell and I have to eat more veggies. But there's actually bitter herbs that we can introduce subtly into our diet on a daily basis that actually just daily build up and make our gut biome inhospitable, because they don't want to be around it. So instead of coating our stomachs with sugar and all the stuff that they love to feed on, I know that you have some hacks, and I would love it if you share with some people some of your hacks, because they're so easy. And we don't like to eat things that are bitter and gross and sour. Everything we eat now, whether we realize it or not, has sugar in it. You can't even buy ketchup or mayonnaise. Like everything is filled with it. So there are ways that we can introduce bitters into our daily diet without it being like, this is so gross. So can you just share a few of your hacks? Because I think there's simple ways that people can start introducing the bitters into their diet.
Well, I started as soon as I realized that all of us have them. And I'm like, oh no, I probably, even though we had done all of our, iterations of fastings, I was like, I probably still have them though. remember there was a time when we were like, yeah, they're all gone. Right? Because we were, and then we realized like, oh no, we probably didn't get rid of them all. And that's maybe why, there are certain things you do every year because they help you to rid them. Right.
Yeah.
So I started, getting on the Google, what can I do just to maybe things that I can. So there are herbs. Yeah. Garlic is definitely one of them. Now I'm not, I'm not thrilled about eating 3 cloves of garlic. I'm not thrilled. I mean, it's good with cooking. I love it as an herb, but I'm not thrilled about doing that every morning. So
right.
I was thinking, well, what can I do? So I found that cloves are definitely like, parasites hate cloves. It's a very strong bitter herb, and so they're running out of your body if they can. So clove, I thought, well, how could I make a blend? So what's something that I do every single morning? I have my cup of coffee. I boil clove and I make like clove water. And I just put it into my coffee. But then I started getting creative and I started boiling not just clove, but cinnamon. And I don't see that someone in the audience, maybe they'll correct me if I'm wrong. I don't see that cinnamon is necessarily anti-parasitic, but it does have health benefits.
Oh yeah.
It definitely has a lot of health benefits to it. And it does other really fabulous things for the body. So clove, cinnamon, cardamom, and I add a little bit of vanilla, extract to it. I made this blend and I put it in my coffee and I was like, this is chai. This is chai coffee is what this is.
Sure.
Yeah, those are all the same cardamom, So essentially the reason why this is kind of a cool thing is because whenever we think about doing cleanses and expelling, worms, we always associate it with it. It has to be this awful process and it's got to be like, oh, I got to feel the pain and what I mean? But what if there were ways that we like little hacks we could do in our daily lives that wasn't like turning our worlds upside down? Just something as simple as maybe adding some cloves to your coffee,
Yeah.
And I pretty much do it every morning when I have my coffee. And I'm telling you, it's so good, Vic. I don't even think I can go back to drinking regular, boring coffee. I'm like, where's my cinnamon? Where's my cloves? Where's my cardamom?
Yes.
It's really good.
Yeah. Well, and pumpkin seeds, ironically, the parasites hate pumpkin seeds.
They do.
There was this kind of trend that came out a few years ago, and every day Dad and I take like 2 to 4 apricot seeds. You're not supposed to you don't eat apricot seeds like peanuts or something,
Right.
You can eat like 2 for each meal. And I think you can have like a total of like 5 a day. So you take it kind of like a supplement. They're very bitter. And Dad eats them like they're sweet tarts. I don't know how he does it, but what I do is I just crunch them between my teeth so they don't hit my actual taste buds. And then I just like swallow them down, like I would a pill or whatever. But they were saying like, oh, apricot seeds are really good as, anti-cancer. But again, if we're gonna tie things back to parasites, and parasites don't like things that are bitter, and with apricot seeds, the bitter, the better.
Right. And I kind of wonder if that's really what's happening. You think that the apricot seeds are directly attacking the cancer cells, but what if the cancer cells are not even cancer cells? What if they are cysts, which we know worms, tapeworms, they will create cysts. And then now all your white blood cells are attacking it. So now you have this thing called autoimmune because you're attacking yourself. Your own immune system is attacking its own self. What if that is the cancer and these seeds that you're, digesting is breaking that apart?
Yeah.
And I think, where did it say, Vic, where it said every fruit bearing seed I give to you for food? I don't think there's a reason why. I mean, I don't think it's coincidence that he left out seed.
Yeah.
The seed, and it's not just apricot seeds, by the way. It seems as though almost every seed that we eat like a food from, it has some really, really amazing, almost supernatural health benefit to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
it's incredible to me how every single thing that God created originally before it was destroyed or hijacked everything in his creation was not only for our survival, but for our health, our longevity, and our joy. And the body, the immune system, it is incredible. We didn't get too much into it tonight, maybe on another episode, but I would love to do a show on the self-healing, miraculous things that our body starts to do on its own when we fast.
Yeah.
And how God basically, he designed our system to heal itself.
Right.
And we don't have time to get into it now. And we talked a little bit about fasting, but that's something that I would like to explore further, because a lot of times when we are sick, the things that we do to get better are actually interfering with the healing process or stunting it. And there's things that we do, like every time we're sick, we do a certain thing, whether we're taking something or whatever. The immune system basically goes like, oh, you don't need me? Oh, okay. And it just ceases to function the way it was designed to function. And so a lot of times we are interrupting our own healing because we're getting in there and we're rubbing some cream on, or we're taking some pill or whatever. And
we're breaking our fever, things like that.
Yeah.
The fever is actually a way of burning, infection out.
Absolutely. And with that said, I do want to have compassion. I understand that there's people out there that live with debilitating pain and chronic pain. And I'm not saying, if you had faith, you would go without your pain pills. I'm not saying that at all. We know that Luke was a physician. We know that some of the things that are out there, again, it's the mercy of God. But a lot of our medications, even to this day, have a lot of ingredients in them. And, if they would just stop putting all the synthetic stuff in and the toxins in and the poisons in, a lot of the base medicine that we have are things that God created, and they work.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, some of the medications like we just went through, hyssop is in medication. In fact, they were experimenting it with COVID because it is it's for your, I'm just going to draw a blank on you, for your lungs, to help clear your lungs out. Okay, it was basically it wasn't with the immune system, but it had to do directly with, people couldn't breathe in their lungs, and it would free them up.
Okay.
The colloidal gold. I mean, the Bible, even though it's not telling us this is medicine, if you read it carefully, they take it and then you see that they get better. This is a medicine.
Yeah.
Because there's so much. I can't even I'll open up another can of worms, so I won't do that. But what's interesting? What you and I discovered as we've been on this healing journey with fasting is we discovered that it's really important that the fast is important. You're going to get a lot of healing in fasting, but it's just as important to end your fast properly, because if you have just detoxed your body and then now you go back to eating the carbs and the sugars and the pop and the Taco Bell and all this, if you go immediately to putting this clean vessel and putting all this garbage into it, you will hurt yourself. And this is just us trying to be responsible. But you know what I found to be interesting, because you can find it in the Bible. Remember the part when Moses is giving the big speech, it's in Deuteronomy, and he's telling them they're getting ready to go into the land. Well, in Deuteronomy 8:8, one of the things that he reminds them of is that when they get to go into the land, it talks about the 7 species that will be there. So that's wheat, barley, pomegranates, olives, grapes, dates, and figs. Now, I do not believe that you can say it's coincidence that all 7 of those 7 species are anti-parasitic. And some of the stuff is used for anti-parasitic drugs. Olive leaves. The goats in Israel, when they're feeling sick, because God gave them the intellect to know when something's not right in their bodies, they will go eat olive leaves and they will naturally deworm themselves. So God has taken them out of Egypt, cleansed them with medicine and with detoxing and fasting. Then when he brought them into the land, he knew, because you can't stay in a fasted state forever. He knew that they were going to have to replace that old diet with one that would maintain their cleanliness.
Yes. Yes.
And all of those fruits that are native to the land of Israel would do that. I don't know. It could just be a coincidence. It could just be.
Yeah, right. Oh man, I love it. Well, as we know, and as we know for sure, this conversation, we have just hit the tip of the iceberg. We have so much more stuff that we have researched out, and I hope we get an opportunity to do more shows on this platform. If not, I think you and I have, this is a little teaser out there, guys. I think April and I are going to be doing a series on this over on my YouTube channel eventually. And, it's not for the weak, you guys. Not everybody's going to want to listen to, 20 hours of this, but April and I are ready to go 20 hours.
Oh, yeah. We have endless things to talk about when it comes to this. Kind of ridiculous.
And every day there's some new discovery. And what's awesome about it is instead of it being like, oh, no, it's not this defeatist, like the more you find out, the more scared you get about your health. It's like the more you see it in scripture, the more the scriptures come alive, and the more you see the mercy and kindness of God. And the more, I never thought that parasites would be a topic that would actually draw me nearer to the Lord, where I have more affections for Yeshua than I did before. But so anyway, we got to cut this probably off now. Hopefully we'll be back, and hopefully April will be back. And I'm sorry we lost our fearless leader at the front of the show here. That he and Tom and Rob are off in an undisclosed location, stuffing themselves with sugar-laden Oreos.
Right.
But thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we appreciate your support and your encouragement and your prayers and all of the emails and the comments that come in. And throughtheblack.com if you want to get a hold of us. But thank you for joining us, and we will see you again next Wednesday.
Put your magic twanger, Froggy.